Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I grew up in a small close-knit town right in the heart of the Midwest. Life there was simple and unassuming, with long summers spent playing in fields of wheat and cold winters huddled around the fireplace, listening to my grandfather's tales of his youth. During my teenage years, I was known as a kid who could fix anything, from broken bikes to old radios. This knack for problem-solving led me to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering. College was a challenging yet exciting journey. After graduating, I landed a job at a renowned engineering firm in the city, and I quickly climbed the corporate ladder. But as the years passed, I longed for a place where life moved a bit slower and neighbors knew each other by name. So when an opportunity arose to transfer to a smaller branch of my company in a quiet suburb, I took it. And that's how I found myself in this charming neighborhood reminiscent of my hometown. I purchased a cozy house at the end of a cul-de-sac with a decent backyard that was next to a small wooded area, perfect for my dog to run around in. The move was a breath of fresh air, and I spent my weekends exploring local hiking trails and getting to know my neighbors who welcomed me with open arms. I even started a small side project, refurbishing old furniture, which rekindled my childhood love for fixing things. But not everything in this neighborhood was as idyllic as it seemed. The neighborhood was under the watchful eye of the HOA, led by Karen, the neighborhood diva. From the moment I moved in, Karen saw me as an outsider, a person who came to disrupt the careful balance she had created. And so I found myself in an unexpected battle, one that would test my patience in ways I never imagined. Early on, Karen had her eyes on me. She'd walk by my house, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes about everything she found displeasing. But here is the surprising part. I wasn't even part of her HOA. My house was just outside its jurisdiction, something I had confirmed before buying the place. But that didn't stop Karen. Fines started appearing in my mailbox, but I ignored them, of course. I wasn't going to be bullied into compliance, especially by someone who had no authority over me. Karen would knock on my door demanding payment. I stood my ground, reminding her each time that I wasn't part of her HOA, but she wouldn't listen. One day I decided to work on my gardening. Gardening was my way of relaxing, and I took pride in my colorful array of flowers and neatly trimmed hedges. As I was planting some tulips, I heard the unmistakable clack of Karen's high heels on the sidewalk. I looked up to see her approaching. "Good morning, Karen. There is nothing good about this morning. That was you violating HOA rules again." I sighed. "Karen, we've been through this. My house isn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. What seems to be the problem this time?" She pointed a manicured finger at my garden. "Those flowers, they are not approved by the HOA. You're bringing down the neighborhood's aesthetic." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, these are tulips. Besides, your rules don't apply here. You're making a big mistake by defying the HOA. I can make things very difficult for you." "I'm not defying anyone. I'm simply doing what I'm free to do on my own property." Karen stepped closer. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." "Is that a threat, Karen?" "It's a promise." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off. I watched her go, and I had no idea then how far she would go to make good on that promise. It was this encounter among several other encounters with Karen, the HOA president, that really built up to that one horrific day when everything went to hell. It seems almost unbelievable now, but each incident felt like another brick in a wall of mounting frustration. Karen would come by almost daily to complain about my lawn. "Your grass is an inch too long," she'd say while waving those HOA fines in my face. Then there was a time she had a fit over my mailbox. "It's not the right shade of gray." I remember laughing at that. A mailbox color? Really? The holidays were no different. I put up some lights and decorations to get into the festive spirit, but Karen saw it as a personal affront. She threatened to tear them down herself, claiming they were too extravagant for the neighborhood standards. I can go on, but I will stop here. You just need to know that each of these encounters was like a small flame, slowly heating the pot of our interactions. And eventually, it all boiled over that day she showed up at my front door with a damn gun. After a busy morning of work, I was at home, taking a break with a cup of coffee. And that's when I heard a knock on my door. Expecting a delivery, I opened it, only to find Karen. A very angry version of Karen. "Good morning, Karen," I greeted her. "You've ignored your last fine. I'll ask you this one last time. Will you pay up or not?" "Not really, no." "Then it's time you learn to respect the HOA." "Karen, we've been over this. I'm not part of your HOA." "You think you're above the rules? Above me?" She reached into her purse and, to my horror, pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at my head. My heart pounded in my chest. "Karen, put the gun down. This is insane." "Go get me my money, you smug brick. Now!" At that moment, fate intervened. A police car patrolling the neighborhood turned into my street. The officers inside the car noticed the altercation at my doorstep. In a flash, they were out of the car drawing their weapons. "Police, drop the weapon." Karen, caught off guard, turned towards the sound, her gun still in hand, and now it's pointed at them. "Ma'am, I will ask again. Drop the weapon," the officer commanded. Karen, realizing the gravity of the situation, slowly lowered her gun. The officers quickly moved in, handcuffing her and reading her rights. I stood there shaking as they took her statement and then mine. "I've had issues with her before, but I never imagined she'd go this far," I explained to the officers. As they licked Karen away, my neighbors began to gather, watching the horrific scene with concern. They knew Karen's reputation, but no one had anticipated her taking such drastic measures. The trial of Karen culminated in a more severe sentence than I had anticipated. After the judge heard all the evidence, including her illegal possession of a firearm and the gravity of her threats against me, the verdict was delivered. Karen was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a fine of $5,000. And in the wake of Karen's sentencing, the HOA convened to elect a new president and board. The new elected president made it clear that the HOA's role was to serve the community, not to police it. And I can say that he delivered. He approached me one evening and extended an invitation to join the HOA, but he was quick to add, "There is absolutely no pressure. We'd just love to have you with us. Our goal is to work together, not impose rules." I told him that I appreciate the offer, but that I'm afraid I'll decline. And he didn't press the matter by any means. In the end, for me, life had returned to a peaceful rhythm. My afternoons were once again filled with the simple joys of gardening, tinkering with my projects, and enjoying the company of friends and neighbors. I, 33 female, I'm going to preface this by saying that my 6-year-old daughter's father, 37 male, whom I'll call Jeff, has never been my romantic partner. We had a one-night stand. I don't like people calling him my ex, as it implies we had some kind of emotional attachment. He was never involved after I told him that I was pregnant, and he actually wanted me to terminate the pregnancy. However, I decided to raise my child alone since I have enough money to do so without child support. For the whole pregnancy and the first 4 years, Jeff was not in the picture. On my mother's recommendation, I did send him pictures and invited him to special events. But he always replied that he had no interest in my daughter. 2 years ago, he reappeared, demanding parental rights. When I didn't comply, he sued. I was denied parental rights. He was given the option to pay child support and then we could revisit giving him actual rights. But he refused. He has the money, much more than me, but he refuses. I still offered to let him see my daughter casually, no child support needed. It was the agreement that anything legal, medical, or educational would not involve him. He overstepped the boundaries and we had a fallout. After that, we didn't hear from him for almost 6 weeks before he called to meet for Christmas. After much discussion, I agreed to bring my daughter over on the condition that her godparents would come. Thus, we went over for Christmas dinner, but only to find out Jeff is married and had never told his family he had a child. It was uncomfortable being judged by a bunch of strangers. It was uncomfortable the whole time. I am going to use fake names, but let's just say my daughter's name is Katie. His wife kept calling my daughter Gabrielle. Not the actual name she used, but it was that different from my daughter's name. The wife was also very physical, trying to pick up my daughter or parent her. I will block her or tell her to please let me deal with my child. The whole time she pretty much ignored me, but Katie didn't seem nervous. So I decided to just bide my time. I hit my limit when my daughter said she needed the bathroom and this stranger went, "Oh Gabby, do you need the potty? Let mommy change you." My daughter hasn't worn diapers in a while now and is more than capable of going to the bathroom alone. I immediately told her to stay away from my daughter and that we were leaving. The woman started wailing that I was kidnapping her baby girl and tried to lunge at me. Her in-laws intervened, consoling her and saying that we weren't leaving and for her to calm down as if she was a victim. At that point, I just glared at Jeff and told him he had better explain or I would be calling the police. He asked me to speak in private in another room and suggested I could just leave my daughter with his parents. No way that would ever happen. Katie's godparents took her with them, despite the wife having a full meltdown. Jeff and I spoke outside and he explained that he and his wife had recently lost a daughter. I'm not going to give specific details on that, but all I'll say is that it was sudden and nobody's fault. And as I can only imagine, it had caused some psychological issues for his wife. Apparently, he had the brilliant idea that having Katie pass as their lost child would help his wife, without telling me. And that's why he wanted visitations and parental rights. He pleaded for me to leave my daughter with him for a little bit, and I asked him what his plan was when his wife heals. His response was disgusting. Well, I'll just send Katie back to you, and it will be just like before. I told him he was insane to think I would let him use my daughter like that. But his wife needs therapy with a professional, not feeding her delusions, and I would not let that woman come within miles of my daughter. He told me I was being cruel and didn't understand the pain of losing a child, and I agreed with him, but reminded Jeff that my priority is not his family, it's my child. What he and his family do to work through their grief has nothing to do with us. I also told him to call his lawyer because I am making sure he never has to contact my child again. So that's what I'm bracing for. He's been blasting my phone since Christmas, but I can easily ignore him. My daughter and I are doing a small travel vacation. This story is so funny, and I've heard it from my mom at least 20 times. It never gets old. For context, we are a Muslim family, quite conservative, from a very conservative village. We practice modesty very strictly, and there is a clear boundary between men and women. Flirting is heavily frowned upon. This took place in Saudi Arabia, which was also a super conservative country at the time. Now to the story. Mom and Dad had my sister, me, and my younger brother, who were 5, 3, and 2 years old respectively at the time, and my mom was also heavily pregnant and had a tumor in her left leg. We were all shopping at a mall. Due to her tumor and pregnancy, Mom was walking like a seal. Her own description, as if she was tripping over herself. Meanwhile, in a mall full of women dressed in black from head to toe, even with their faces covered, one woman stood out. She came walking from the opposite side, slowly getting closer to us. Her abaya was unbuttoned and unzipped. She wore leggings under knees that defined her legs and stilettos that made loud clicking sounds with each step. Her hands were nicely decorated with bracelets that created their own melodies. She really stood out, not shaming anyone here. Suddenly, Dad started singing a song in Arabic that translates to, "She walks like a deer, the walk of a maiden." Considering my mom's condition, this was definitely not directed at her. Mom stopped and turned to him, exclaiming, "Excuse me?" And Dad immediately got defensive, saying, "It just slipped out." Mom retorted, "That means it was exactly what you were thinking." Dad, acting like the victim, tells Mom he's never taken her to the mall again. Mom, obviously mad, tells him he sounds ridiculous because he's the one flirting with another woman, while his kids and pregnant wife walked right beside him. She then vows to let the whole world know. A few days later, we traveled back to our home country, and as I said, we come from a village and word travels fast. Mom told everyone, again, I repeat, flirting is considered really rude and is heavily frowned upon in our society at the time. For the next 2 months, whoever saw my dad would start singing, "She walks like a deer, the walk of a maiden." Dad was embarrassed and humiliated as heck. We moved back to Saudi Arabia. My dad was friends with his co-workers and their wives were friends with my mom. Mom told him. 2 months ago, Ham proceeded to narrate the story. The wives went home and told their husbands. But next day when Dad went to work and the moment he opened the door, his co-worker sang, "She walks like a deer, the walk of a maiden." Dad immediately called my mom pleading, "Please, stop telling everyone." And Mom vowed again she would humiliate him over it. 17 years later, every time she meets someone new, this story is a must-tell. It might not sound like much, but in our society, this is actually pretty humiliating for my dad. Very funny for us though, never gets old. Edit. Dad laughs about this now. He's completely over it. He's the kind of person to wear his heart on his sleeve, so I can confidently say it doesn't affect him. Thanks though to everyone who's concerned and thought it's abusive or that my parents hate each other. They don't. They have a very healthy relationship. Let me tell you about the time I went to Vegas and how it turned into a tale of pity revenge that still cracks me up. My name's Mike, by the way. I'm your average Joe, but with a knack for finding myself in the oddest of situations. It all started when I decided to take a spontaneous trip to Vegas. I was feeling lucky, or so I thought. I landed, grabbed my bags and hailed a cab to take me to my hotel. The driver seemed grumpy right from the get-go. I tried making small talk, asking about the best casinos, but he just grunted responses. Halfway through, he suddenly pulls over. "Get out," he barks. Confused, I asked why. He said he didn't like my attitude and left me stranded. There I was in the middle of nowhere with my bags, watching the taillights of the cab disappear. So I walked. It took me hours to reach my hotel, and by then my mood had soured. Vegas wasn't kind to me. I lost more than I cared to admit. The games, the bright lights, the constant buzz, it was exhilarating but brutal. After several days of what I can only describe as a financial bloodbath, I decided it was time to head home. I was walking with my tail between my legs, pockets lighter than when I arrived. I packed my bags feeling defeated and made my way to the line of the cabs outside the hotel. And would you believe it? There he was, Mr. Grumpy, a cab driver who dumped me on a road at the very end of the line. As I stood there, an idea sparked in my mind. A petty, childish idea, but in that moment, it felt right. I am going to ride with this guy again. I'll let him know it. I went to the first cab in line. "How much to the airport?" I asked. The driver, a middle-aged man, with a bored expression said, $15. Then I asked the inappropriate question, the one about the you-know-what. His reaction was immediate. "Get the hell out of my cab," he shouted. I smirked and moved to the next cab, repeating the process. The reactions were priceless. Stupid, I know. Each driver kicked me out, but I kept going all the way down the line. The other drivers began to notice, whispering and watching curiously. Finally, I reached the last cab. There he was, Mr. Grumpy, looking as surly as ever. "Hey, how much to the airport?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. He looked up, recognition flashing in his eyes, then quickly masked by indifference. $15. He grunted. I handed him the $15 and got in, saying, "Great, let's go." We pulled away, and as we did, I looked back at the line of cabs. The drivers were all staring, mouths agape. I gave them a big cheesy thumbs up, grinning from ear to ear. As we drove, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. Sure, it was petty, childish even, but at the moment it felt like a victory. Mr. Grumpy didn't say a word during the entire drive. We reached the airport and I thanked him with the biggest grin I could muster. He just nodded, clearly eager to see the back of me. I grabbed my bags and headed into the airport, still chuckling. You see, sometimes it's the little victories that count. I may have lost a fortune in Vegas, but I want a silly story to tell. And that, my friends, is a story of how I got my petty revenge on a grumpy cab driver in Vegas.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.